What if the biggest betrayal inside the royal family didn't come from an enemy, but from the one person Prince Andrew trusted the most? What if the collapse of Royal Lodge wasn't simply a messy domestic dispute, but the final domino in a chain of scandals, secrets, and silent power struggles that the monarchy spent years trying to bury? Imagine the doors of one of Britain's most private royal residences slamming shut. Not because of paparazzi, not because of investigators, but because Andrew himself demanded it. And imagine the person he forced out wasn't a stranger or a political threat, but Sarah Ferguson, the woman who remained by his side long after the world turned away from him. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why did that happen? And why now? Right after King Charles III stripped Andrew of his remaining royal titles in October 2025, think about the timing. Think about the emotional volatility. Think about the desperation simmering beneath the surface. Because this story isn't just about an eviction. It's about a man cornered by the consequences of his past, a woman who finally had enough, and a monarchy trying desperately to contain a crisis at its gates. But before we get to the explosion that tore their lives apart, we have to rewind to the moment everything inside Royal Lodge began to crack. Let's start with the night the lights stayed on until dawn. Picture this. It's October 2025, only days after Buckingham Palace released a statement that felt like a cold, final sentence. Prince Andrew, stripped of every remaining title, honor, and responsibility, had officially been reduced from problematic royal figure to private citizen under public scrutiny. No safety net, no shield, no royal protocol to hide behind. For Andrew, it wasn't just a humiliation. It was a freefall. The walls of Royal Lodge, once symbols of privilege and status, suddenly felt like a cage closing in. The silence was heavy. The corridors were as cold as the headlines outside. And Sarah Ferguson, who had spent years defending him, shielding him, living alongside him despite everything, was now walking through those same hallways with a growing sense of dread. Because here's the question nobody dared ask. What happens to a man who loses everything except the one person who never truly left? And what happens when that person starts to pull away? Late into the night, Andrew paced through the lodge, flicking lights on room by room. A man searching for answers, or maybe for someone to blame. The reputation he once clung to was gone. The public loathing was louder than ever. And inside those walls, he felt something shifting, something he couldn't control, something involving Sarah. Let's be honest. Their relationship had always been unconventional. They divorced. They stayed close. They lived together. They tangled their finances, their routines, and their emotional dependencies like two people who never fully broke up, but never fully reunited. For decades, Sarah Ferguson was the closest thing Andrew had to an anchor. That makes what happened next even more unbelievable. Because while Andrew spiraled, Sarah was moving differently. She was meeting with people, advisors, associates, people Andrew didn't trust, people he didn't recognize. And the worst part? She wasn't telling him everything. She wasn't updating him. She wasn't looping him in the way she used to. And that made something inside Andrew snap. Ask yourself, when someone already drowning in scandal, shame, and public rejection starts to feel abandoned by the one person left in their corner, what do? Do they pull closer? Or push harder? Inside Royal Lodge, the answer was becoming dangerously clear. Andrew didn't just feel cornered. He felt betrayed. But betrayal is a complicated word here, because Sarah wasn't plotting against him. She was trying to stabilize the chaos before it consumed them both. She was trying to restructure her life, her finances, her future, and yes, maybe even her independence. Contradiction. The more she tried to help, the more he felt attacked. Irony. The more she tried to protect him, the more he saw her as a threat. Emotion. Two people trapped in a cycle neither knew how to break. All of this tension, building, brewing, festering, set the stage for what would become one of the most explosive moments in modern royal history. But before we reach the argument that tore their bond apart, we have to understand how fragile things had become behind those ornate doors. Imagine walking through a house where every room holds a memory. Every photo frame reminds you of a life that doesn't exist anymore. Every echo in the hallway feels louder because you know the world outside wants you gone. That was Andrew's reality. And after losing his royal titles in October 2025, The pressure inside Royal Lodge reached a boiling point. Even the staff noticed. Even the silence felt different. Even Sarah felt him changing. There were nights he barely slept. Nights where he replayed every headline in his head. Nights where he wondered if Sarah was planning something without him. Something that would force him to confront the one thing he feared most, the possibility of losing her too. Now, think about this carefully. Why would the man who owed his survival, socially, emotionally, and logistically, to Sarah Ferguson suddenly kick her out? Would someone do that calmly, rationally, strategically? Or would that require eruption? A final straw? A discovery that pushed everything over the edge? But here's where things get even more complicated. Because while Andrew was spiraling emotionally, Sarah was growing stronger. She was attending meetings. She was getting advice. She was preparing contingencies. Something she found, or realized, or decided, triggered a quiet shift in her behavior. And Andrew noticed. Obsessively. Every unanswered phone call, every closed door, every private conversation sent his paranoia into overdrive. To him, secrecy meant betrayal. To Sarah, secrecy meant survival. This is where the tension becomes almost cinematic. You have a man losing everything. A woman trying to protect herself. A palace under pressure. A public hungry for every detail. And two people trapped in the same home, unable to escape the weight of their shared history. But something else was happening too. Something that would flip the entire situation on its head. Because on one particular morning, hours before the confrontation the world would eventually hear whispers about, Sarah made a decision. A personal mission. A moment of quiet determination that would become the catalyst for everything that followed. She walked into a part of Royal Lodge she rarely entered. A room Andrew kept closed. A room she had questions about. A room she believed held answers. And that's when things took a turn. Now let's pause for a moment and ask the real question. What exactly did Sarah see inside that room? What did she discover? What set off the chain reaction that ended with her being kicked out of Royal Lodge? Because make no mistake, this wasn't random. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a simple argument. This was a volcano finally erupting after years of pressure. And as dawn broke over Windsor that day, neither of them had any idea how much destruction the next 24 hours would unleash. But the moment Sarah stepped out of that room, the fuse was lit. What she found would challenge their loyalty, their history, and everything they had built together. And when Andrew realized she had seen it, when he understood she had something he didn't want her to have, everything inside Royal Lodge would explode. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What did Sarah see inside that room? What was so explosive, so unsettling, that it ignited a chain reaction powerful enough to shatter a decades-long bond? That's the question everyone wants answered. And yet the truth is far more complicated than a single moment of discovery. Because nothing inside Royal Lodge happens in isolation. Every secret links to another. Every whisper has a history. And every silence, especially Andrew's, is loaded with meaning. So before we jump to the confrontation that blew their world apart, we need to step into the lodge at the exact moment the fuse reached the flame. Imagine this. The sun is barely rising, and the entire estate is soaked in that eerie, bluish half-light that makes everything feel both calm and dangerous at the same time. Royal Lodge, for all its elegance, suddenly feels hostile. The polished floors, the ornate staircases, the echoing hallways. Everything looks normal, yet nothing feels normal anymore. And Andrew, after pacing through the night like a man haunted by shadows, has finally collapsed into a chair in the drawing room, staring blankly at the fireplace that hasn't been lit in weeks. He's exhausted, but not in a way sleep can fix. This is the exhaustion of someone who has spent too long fighting the world, only to realize the world isn't the biggest enemy anymore. The enemy is his own history, his own decisions, his own fear of losing the last thing he has, control. And right now, he feels that control slipping. Because Sarah isn't acting like she used to. She's moving differently, thinking differently, making decisions without him. And to Andrew, a man whose identity was shaped by hierarchy, protocol, and the illusion of authority, that change feels like betrayal. But here's the contradiction the public never sees. Sarah isn't pulling away to hurt him. She's pulling away because she's tired of holding up a structure that's already collapsing. She's tired of being the emotional caretaker, the financial buffer, the public buffer, the The private shield. She's tired of being responsible for the wreckage Andrew refuses to confront. And on this morning, the morning everything would start to unravel, she knew she had to get answers. Real ones. Not the vague half-truths Andrew muttered when cornered. Not the silence he weaponized when he felt embarrassed. She wanted facts, documents, clarity, a map of who they were, where they stood, and what was coming next. So she stepped into that room. And the moment she crossed the threshold, she knew she wasn't supposed to be there. Think of a room frozen in time. Papers scattered. Old correspondence piled on a desk. A half-empty glass untouched for hours. A strange mix of nostalgia and panic lingering in the air. That was the room Andrew kept closed. His private space. His sanctuary. His hiding place. And Sarah, after years of respecting certain boundaries, finally crossed one. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever stumbled upon something you weren't meant to see, and even before you understood it, your stomach twisted because you knew it would change everything? That's the feeling Sarah had. Instant. Cold. Heavy. She wasn't snooping. She wasn't spying. She wasn't plotting. She was simply looking for truth in a house overflowing with secrets. And here's where the tension tightens. Because downstairs, Andrew wakes up suddenly, not from a sound, but from a feeling. You know that instinct you can't explain? The one that tells you something is wrong before you can articulate why? That's what jolted him awake. He didn't know Sarah was upstairs. He didn't know she had entered that room. But he knew something was off, the same way animals sense storms before they hit. He stands up. He listens. He scans the corridor. Nothing. But fear doesn't need proof to exist. So while Sarah is in the room sorting through fragments of Andrew's private world, Andrew is slowly walking toward the stairs with a dread he can't shake. Let's talk about this dread for a moment. This wasn't fear of Sarah. It was fear of exposure. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of losing the one person who had remained loyal even when the rest of the world didn't. There's an emotional irony here. The more Sarah tried to understand him, the more Andrew felt threatened. And that's how you get a man pacing down a hallway like he's going into battle against the only person who ever defended him. But before he reaches the top of the stairs, let's go back into the room with Sarah. She stands in front of a desk filled with folders, letters, and what looks like months, maybe years, of correspondence Andrew never mentioned. Financial paperwork, estate documents, communications with advisors long dismissed, expenses, outstanding obligations. Notes scribbled in Andrew's handwriting, showing panic, frustration, and desperation he never shared with her. And then, something else. Something she picks up, reads once, reads again, slowly. And whatever it is, whatever she sees, makes her expression shift from confusion to concern to something much sharper. Something closer to fear, or anger, or heartbreak. Maybe a mix of all three. The exact contents don't matter yet. What matters is the realization. She knows now. She understands what he's been hiding. She understands why he's been spiraling. And she understands that Andrew's situation is far worse than she ever imagined. Now here's the twist. Even though she's stunned, even though she feels misled, even though she feels blindsided by what she discovers, the first instinct she has is not to leave. It's to help. Because Sarah, whether people want to admit it or not, has always been the fixer, the stabilizer, the one cleaning up after Andrew's emotional storms. And her immediate reaction is to protect him, again, even though part of her wonders if he deserves it. But before she can decide what to do next, she hears footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming toward the room. Her heart jumps, not because she's afraid of Andrew, but because she knows exactly how he will react to finding her there. She knows this will trigger something uncontrollable. She knows he won't process the situation logically. And she knows this moment, this discovery, will become the catalyst for everything that follows. She turns. She freezes. Andrew is standing in the doorway, and the expression on his face isn't anger. It's betrayal. Raw, immediate, unfiltered. There's a long, heavy silence. The kind that stretches and warps time. The kind that holds 1,000 unspoken words. And Sarah, normally quick with explanations or jokes or softeners, stands speechless for the first time in years. Because how do you explain stepping into a room that was never technically off limits, but always emotionally forbidden? How do you explain trying to help someone who doesn't want to be helped? How do you explain discovering a truth someone has spent years trying to hide? And before she can speak, Andrew breaks the silence. "What are you doing in here?" Not yelled, not whispered, just cold, controlled, terrifyingly calm. And that calm is worse than rage. Because calm means finality. Calm means decision. Calm means the emotional wall has already gone up. Sarah tries to answer, but Andrew is already scanning the room, reading the air, understanding exactly what she saw. And his breathing changes, not loud enough to call panic, but sharp enough to expose cracks in his composure. "Let me ask you, have you ever watched someone realize they've been caught in a truth they never wanted to share? It's like watching a mask crumble in slow motion." That's what happened to Andrew. Every ounce of defensiveness, shame, and fear he'd bottled up began leaking through his expression. And that's when the argument begins. Not with shouting, not with accusations, with quiet, razor-sharp sentences that cut far deeper than raised voices ever could. "Andrew, you had no right." "Sarah, I had every reason." "Andrew, you think you know everything." "Sarah, I know you're drowning." "Andrew, you're making it worse." "Sarah, I'm trying to save you." Contradiction after contradiction. Truth versus emotion. Fear versus concern. Loyalty versus self-preservation. Everything they avoided discussing for years erupts in that room, fueled by exhaustion, mistrust, and the pressure of a public scandal that never ends. And yet, even in the heat of the confrontation, there's something heartbreaking beneath it all. Two people who once understood each other better than anyone now standing on opposite sides of a truth neither wants to face. Andrew steps forward. Sarah steps back, not out of fear, but out of clarity. And in that moment, she knows the relationship, whatever shape it once had, is about to cross a line it can't return from. Because Andrew is about to say something that will change the course of their lives. Something sharp, something final, something he'll never be able to take back. But he hasn't said it yet. And what happens before he speaks is far more shocking. Because before the final blow of the argument lands, before the eviction, before the chaos, before the decision that would make headlines around the world, Sarah notices something else in the room. Something she hadn't seen before. Something partially hidden under the papers. And when she picks it up, everything inside her shifts. Because this new discovery, this new piece of information, this changes the entire story. And Andrew knows at the moment he sees her holding it. What happens next will turn their confrontation into a full-scale implosion. But the moment Sarah lifts that final document, everything inside Royal Lodge is about to detonate. What happens in the moments before a relationship explodes? What does the air feel like, the silence sound like, the tension due to two people who once believed nothing could break them? That's the heart of this chapter. Because before Andrew kicked Sarah out of Royal Lodge, before the headlines, before the shockwaves, before the monarchy scrambled behind the scenes, there was a single moment, a single discovery, a single shift inside that private room. And once it happened, nothing between them would ever be the same again. Let's step back into that room. The door is open behind Sarah. Andrew is frozen in the doorway, and the entire atmosphere feels electrified, like the seconds before lightning strikes. Sarah has just picked up something she wasn't supposed to see. Something partially hidden under stacks of papers. Something that immediately rewired the entire conversation. But what was it? And why did it matter so much? Before we answer that, think about the emotional physics inside that room. Andrew is not just a disgraced prince. He is a man stripped of his titles, his future, his dignity, and, arguably, his identity. The world has been closing in around him, inch by inch, scandal by scandal, decision by decision. The king's final blow in October 2025 wasn't just a symbolic act. It was a seismic shock to Andrew's fragile sense of self. And Sarah? She isn't just an ex-wife. She's the last remaining ally. The friend who lived with him. The co-parent. The emotional partner in everything except name. The person he believed would always stand by him, no matter how dark things became. Which is exactly why this moment cuts so deeply. Because what Sarah found in that room wasn't just paperwork. It wasn't just financial documents. It wasn't just correspondence. It was a letter. A letter from someone Andrew had promised he was no longer communicating with. A letter that revealed he had been hiding far more from Sarah than she realized. You can feel her pulse shift. You can see her eyes scanning the page twice, then 3 times, as though she's trying to translate a language she already knows too well. And when she looks up, Her expression is something Andrew has never seen from her before. Not shock, not anger, but disappointment. Heavy, quiet, crushing disappointment. And here's the twist. Disappointment hurts far more than rage. Andrew sees the way her face changes. He sees the understanding land. He sees the truth settle into her expression like a stone dropping into water. And he panics. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but internally, deep, primal panic. Because he didn't expect her to see that. Not today. Not ever. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been caught not in a lie, but in the truth you hid because you knew the lie would break someone's heart less? That's what this moment is for Andrew. There is no malicious intent, no strategy, no scheme. Just a man terrified of losing the last person who still believed in him, and doing exactly the thing that would guarantee he lost her anyway. Sarah lowers the letter slowly, like it physically weighs her down. For a few seconds, she doesn't say a word. And that silence hits Andrew harder than any argument could, because he knows what silence means. Silence means realization. Silence means clarity. Silence means the emotional ground beneath them is shifting. When she finally speaks, the words are soft, but sharp. You told me it was over. Andrew flinches. Not visibly, but emotionally. I didn't think it mattered anymore, he answers, the sentence already collapsing under its own weakness. It mattered to me, she says. And it's in that moment, just a breath, just a heartbeat, that the entire dynamic between them fractures. Because Sarah isn't accusing. She isn't attacking. She is grieving. Grieving the gap that's been growing between them, the secrets he kept, the spiraling he hid behind half-smiles and closed doors. She is grieving the man she tried to save, who wouldn't let her. But Andrew doesn't see grief. He sees threat. He sees the person holding his last secret, his last vulnerability, his last emotional safety net. And that triggers something primal inside him, something reckless, something self-destructive. The kind of instinct wounded people unleash when they feel trapped. Put it down, Andrew says. Not loudly, not forcefully, but with a coldness that makes the temperature in the room drop. Sarah raises an eyebrow. The letter hangs loosely between her fingers, as if she's deciding whether to drop it or protect it. Is this why you've been shutting me out? She asks. Is this why you've been spiraling? Because you couldn't be honest with me about this? Andrew's jaw tightens. You wouldn't understand. You didn't give me the chance. It's astonishing how fast their voices shift from controlled to emotional, from calm to sharp, from understanding to accusation. And yet, underneath all of it, what's really happening is heartbreak. Raw, quiet heartbreak. Two people who survived scandal together, who survived exile together, who survived public shame together, but couldn't survive the truth between them. Andrew steps farther into the room, closing the gap between them, but widening the emotional distance. Sarah backs up by instinct, clutching the letter. She doesn't do it to provoke him. She does it because she knows, deeply, that he cannot be reasoned with in this state. Give it to me, he says again. And if I don't, she asks. Andrew pauses, just enough to reveal a flash of something painful. Fear, maybe. Fear she'll leave. Fear she'll expose him. Fear she'll stop caring. Fear she'll stop loving him in the way she has, quietly, privately, consistently, for years. Then he says 4 words that cut the oxygen out of the room. You need to leave. Not a request. Not a plea. A command. And it lands like a blade. Sarah stares at him, disbelief freezing her in place. Leave? She repeats, almost laughing at the absurdity. Leave the room. No, he says, voice trembling with the weight of a decision he can't reverse. Leave the house. And just like that, the entire history between them collapses. Let's take a moment to analyze this psychologically. Andrew's reaction isn't about the letter. It's about losing control, losing power, losing the last piece of emotional stability he had. And instead of pulling Sarah closer, instead of explaining, instead of trusting her, he chooses the only weapon he still feels he can use, the house. Royal Lodge, the symbol of his remaining identity, his castle, his bunker, his last domain. Kicking her out isn't logic. It's desperation disguised as authority. But Sarah? She doesn't crumble. She doesn't shout. She doesn't beg. She simply stares at him with a long, stunned silence that forces the truth into focus. You're scared, she says quietly. Andrew looks like she slapped him. You're terrified, she continues. Terrified of what happens if I know everything. Terrified of what happens if someone sees behind the curtain. I said leave, Andrew repeats, but the conviction is slipping. Sarah doesn't move. Not because she wants to fight, but because she wants him to understand how self-destructive he's being. After everything, she says. After all we've survived? After all the years, this is how you react. Andrew's voice cracks, not loudly, but unmistakably. You weren't supposed to see it. And that's the truth. The deepest truth. The truth that explains everything. He didn't want her to see the mess behind the curtain. The financial chaos, the internal panic, the letters, the mistakes, the desperation, the consequences he hasn't admitted even to himself. But she did. And now he can't bear it. This is where the story pivots. Because Sarah, with the kind of strength people never give her credit for, straightens her shoulders, folds the letter, places it gently on the desk, and says, "If I leave, I'm not coming back." Andrew blinks. He wasn't prepared for that. He didn't expect boundaries. He didn't expect backbone. He didn't expect her to finally draw a line. Then, because fear makes people say the most foolish things, he doubles down. "Good," he says. One word. One syllable. One irreversible mistake. Sarah's face goes still. Completely still. The kind of stillness that comes right before something breaks inside a person. She nods once. Just once. Then she turns toward the door. Andrew doesn't stop her. Because he can't. Because he's frozen in a moment he knows he'll regret, but doesn't know how to fix. She reaches the hallway. She walks down the stairs. She doesn't pack a bag. She doesn't say goodbye. She doesn't slam the door. She leaves quietly. And that quiet departure is what devastates Andrew the most. Because people who plan to come back slam doors. People who plan to return argue. People who still want the relationship to survive fight. People who leave quietly, they're done. But here's the twist you didn't expect. Sarah doesn't leave the property right away. On her way out, she notices something in the foyer. Something small. Something out of place. Something she has never seen before. And when she picks it up, the story shifts again. The power changes again. The narrative turns once more. Because what she finds at the bottom of those stairs, it reveals something Andrew didn't even know had happened inside Royal Lodge. And when she realizes what it means, she knows the situation is far, far worse than she thought. What she found there, what it meant, and who put it there? That's the moment this private argument becomes a royal crisis. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What was lying at the bottom of those stairs? What object was so small, so easy to miss, and yet powerful enough to flip the entire storyline on its head? Before we reveal that, we must return to Sarah Ferguson's emotional state in the moments right after leaving the confrontation upstairs. Because what people misunderstand about explosive moments is that they don't end when the shouting stops. They linger. They echo. They dig under the skin. The real consequences unfold in the quiet seconds after the argument, when adrenaline fades and clarity takes its place. Sarah moves through Royal Lodge with a kind of stunned calm. The calm of someone whose world has just twisted sideways and hasn't fully caught up yet. There's something surreal about walking through a place you've lived in for years, knowing the dynamic has changed so drastically that every room feels different. The polished banister she touches on her way down. The oil paintings staring at her silently. The smell of furniture polish and old wood. Everything is the same physically, yet nothing feels the same emotionally. Her mind is replaying the confrontation upstairs like a looped recording. Andrew's words, his expression, the fear behind his anger, the panic behind his coldness, the realization that she had crossed into a room he considered sacred, not because of what was physically inside, but because of what it represented, vulnerability. But she also replayed her own words, her own choices, her own decision to finally push back after years of tiptoeing around Andrew's moods, anxieties, and unpredictable reactions. It wasn't the letter she was holding onto emotionally. It was that moment when she stood her ground, perhaps for the first time in years. And that's when she notices it. A small metallic object, resting against the last step. Something that absolutely should not be in a royal residence. Something that does not belong to her. And definitely does not belong to Andrew. She bends down slowly, narrowing her eyes as her fingers close around it. It's cold, smooth, lightweight, modern, not part of the decor, not dropped by staff. And when she flips it over in her hand, Her chest tightens in immediate alarm. It's a tracking device, or at least something that strongly resembles one. A circular, discrete, palm-sized location tracker, the kind you attach to keys, luggage, or a person. A device that should never be in Royal Lodge, let alone sitting on the floor where someone clearly dropped it in a hurry. And instantly, Sarah's entire understanding of the morning shifts. Because now the question isn't just, why did Andrew hide things from me? It's, who else has been inside this house? That realization slams into her with the same force as Andrew's command to leave. And suddenly, the argument upstairs feels less like a personal betrayal and more like a symptom of a much larger problem, one that neither of them saw coming. But let's freeze the moment here. Let's look at it like a director analyzing a frame of film. A device on the ground. A woman standing alone at the foot of a grand staircase. The early morning light filtering through the windows. The faint echo of Andrew's voice still ringing in her ears. Now ask yourself, how would you react? Would you shrug it off? Would you assume it was nothing? Or would you feel a cold, creeping sense that something far more dangerous is happening behind the scenes? Sarah isn't naive. She has been in the royal ecosystem long enough to know that nothing, absolutely nothing, appears in a royal household by accident. Every object has a story. Every presence has a motive. Every intrusion has consequences. And this device screams intrusion. But before she can even process that, the front door opens. A quiet, controlled opening, not the kind made by a delivery person or an unexpected visitor. This is deliberate, professional, almost careful. Sarah straightens instinctively, her fingers curling around the tracker. And in walks one of the king's senior aides. Not her ally, not Andrew's confidant, not someone who casually drops by. This is the kind of aide who only appears when something serious, something extremely serious, is happening within royal circles. He freezes when he sees her. She freezes when she sees him. Both their eyes drop to the object in her hand, and the air between them stiffens instantly. "Mrs. Ferguson," he says, recovering quickly. "I didn't expect to see you here." Sarah tilts her head. Clearly, he attempts a smile, but it's the kind of smile only used by people who are hiding something uncomfortable, something official, something rehearsed. "I was told His Royal Highness wished to have a document delivered," he says, voice too smooth. Sarah doesn't respond immediately. She studies him, his posture, his expression, his timing. Why now? Why conveniently at the exact moment she discovered a suspicious device sitting at the bottom of the stairs? And then the larger question. If the aide is here, then who else has been here? Because a tracking device doesn't appear out of thin air. Someone placed it. Someone deliberate. Someone with access. The aide clears his throat, subtly glancing toward the staircase. "Is His Royal Highness upstairs?" Sarah's voice is calm, controlled. "He's occupied." The aide nods, but his eyes continue darting, subtly, nervously, to the device she's now hiding in her palm. "Is everything all right?" he asks, but not in a genuinely concerned way. More like he's desperate to know how much she knows. "Let me ask you, have you ever spoken to someone who asks harmless questions with dangerous intent?" That's what this moment feels like. Two conversations happening at once. One verbal, one silent, and the silent one is far louder. Sarah decides to test him. "Strange thing," she says casually. "I found something unusual inside the house." The aide's shoulders stiffen just slightly. It's quick, subtle, but noticeable enough that Sarah's instincts sharpen. "Oh," he says. "What kind of something?" "The kind," she replies, "that makes me wonder who's been walking around here without permission." A pause, a fraction of a second. But in that fraction, truth spills out through body language. He knows what she found. He knows why it's dangerous. And he's trying to figure out whether she's a threat or someone he can control. "Royal Lodge has had maintenance staff in and out," he says quickly. Too quickly. Security checks. Routine assessments. Perhaps something was misplaced. Sarah doesn't blink. Maintenance staff don't carry these. She opens her palm. The aide's breath catches. Not obviously. Not dramatically. Just enough for Sarah to see it. Just enough for her to know he recognizes the device. And that recognition means someone used it inside the lodge. Recently. Secretly. And definitely not by mistake. This changes everything. Because if someone has been moving through the house, planting trackers, monitoring movements, observing rooms, then Andrew's paranoia wasn't just emotional. It might have been justified, at least in part. And that means their argument wasn't simply personal. It was triggered by a pressure neither of them knew existed. The aide clears his throat sharply. "Mrs. Ferguson, may I?" He gestures to the device. "No," Sarah says. One word. Unmovable. Steady. And the aide doesn't push further. That hesitation confirms her suspicions. Someone high enough in the palace chain of command knows exactly what this device is, and why it shouldn't be in the hands of someone like Sarah Ferguson. But here's where the story tightens like a noose. Because upstairs, Andrew has no idea what she's found. He's replaying their argument. He's sinking deeper into his emotional implosion. He is spiraling into a dark place where he believes he's lost the one person who would never abandon him. Meanwhile, downstairs, Sarah is realizing that the problem inside the lodge is far bigger than their relationship, bigger than the argument, bigger than their history, bigger than the letter. This is surveillance, intrusion, manipulation, something orchestrated. But by whom? The aide breaks the tense silence. "It would be best," he says carefully, "if you leave matters of security to the appropriate authorities." Sarah steps closer, not aggressively, but with purpose. "I've lived in this house longer than you've held your position," she says. "I know what belongs here, and I know what doesn't." He swallows hard. "You should speak with His Majesty." The message hidden beneath the words is deafening. This isn't about Andrew anymore. This is about the king. This is about palace control. This is about internal pressure playing out behind closed doors. And suddenly, Sarah understands something chilling. The palace hasn't been watching Andrew from a distance. The palace has been watching him up close. Too close. How long has this been happening? Why was it necessary? And why would they risk placing something so detectable, so findable, inside his residence? Unless they wanted someone to find it. Unless this was a message. Unless this was a warning. Sarah holds the device tighter. "Tell His Majesty," she says slowly, deliberately, "that I found this. And tell him I will be asking questions." The aide tries to maintain composure, but his mask cracks for just a moment. "Mrs. Ferguson," he says, "you need to be very careful. It's not a threat. It's a truth. And it terrifies her." Because suddenly, the earlier argument with Andrew isn't the real story. It's the distraction. The real story is why someone felt the need to track movements inside Royal Lodge. Who placed the device? Who were they following? And what were they hoping to uncover? As the aide leaves, Sarah looks up the staircase, her chest tightening. Should she tell Andrew? Should she confront him again? Should she leave for her own safety? Or should she stay and figure out what's really happening inside this house? She doesn't know yet, but she does know one thing. If she keeps this device, her world will change. If she gives it to Andrew, his world will explode. If she exposes it, the palace will panic. Someone was in the house last night. Those 6 words hit Sarah with more force than the argument upstairs, the letter, the tracking device, everything. Because suddenly, the puzzle pieces shift. Suddenly, the emotional explosion between her and Andrew no longer feels like the story. Suddenly, the argument becomes background noise compared to the earthquake that sentence unleashes. She stares up at him, gripping the railing, the small tracking device burning like ice in her palm. And for the first time since the confrontation in the private room, she sees something in Andrew's eyes that shakes her deeper than his anger ever could. He's afraid. Not irritated. Not defensive. Not offended. Afraid. And fear is something Andrew almost never shows. It's something he buries under sarcasm, under bluster, under stiff upper lip bravado. But right now, standing at the top of the stairs with his shoulders tight and his breath uneven, he looks like a man who has finally realized he's not in control, not of the house, not of the situation, not even of his own narrative. Sarah's heart pounds. She doesn't speak yet. She just waits. Because whatever he says next will reveal whether this is paranoia or something far more dangerous. Andrew descends the staircase slowly, one step at a time, as though each step requires him to gather courage. And Sarah studies him, not with anger now, but with concern. The emotional battlefield between them hasn't vanished, but something bigger is now standing between them. When he reaches the bottom, he glances at her hand, just for a microsecond, barely enough to register. But Sarah notices. He's scanning for what she might be holding, what she might have seen, what she might have discovered. She closes her fingers tighter around the device. "What do you mean someone was in the house?" she asks, her voice steady but low. Andrew doesn't answer immediately. He walks past her, heading toward the drawing room. A cold draft follows him, the strange kind that only seems to appear when fear is trying to slip into the conversation. He gestures for her to follow. "Come downstairs," he says. "I need to show you something." The tension thickens as she follows him into the drawing room. He doesn't look back at her. He stands in front of the window, staring out at the gardens, as though the answer might be hiding somewhere between the trees and the morning mist. "Andrew," Sarah presses, "what happened?" He exhales slowly, long and heavy. Then he turns to her. "I heard footsteps." Her breath catches. "Footsteps where?" "In the hallway outside my room. Around 2 in the morning." The air in the room changes instantly, because Andrew isn't the type to imagine sounds. He's stubborn, grounded, irrational at times, yes, but not delusional. If he says he heard footsteps, then he heard something real. But the question is, whose footsteps? Sarah steps closer. "Did you check the hall?" At this, Andrew looks away, ashamed, almost. "No." "Why not?" she demands. A quiet beat passes. Then Andrew says something heartbreaking in its vulnerability. "I thought it was you." Silence. Thick, painful, loaded. Sarah feels her chest tighten. Because if he truly believed she was walking outside his room at 2 a.m., and he didn't check, it means the emotional rupture between them isn't just new. It's been building quietly for weeks, maybe months. He was waiting for her, expecting her, needing her presence without admitting it. And last night, when footsteps passed by his room, he assumed she had come to check on him, or speak to him, or simply make sure he wasn't unraveling alone. But it wasn't her, and the realization rattles him. "Andrew," she says gently, "I wasn't upstairs last night. I slept in the guest room, on the opposite side of the house." His jaw tightens. "I know that now," he mutters. She steps closer, now genuinely worried. "Are you sure you heard someone?" Andrew nods. Not dramatically, just a small, firm nod that settles the truth between them. "And it wasn't the creaking of the old floors?" Sarah asks. "No, not the wind. No, not the staff." "There was no staff here last night," Andrew says, turning toward her with a grim expression. "I dismissed most of them for the week." Sarah's stomach drops. A nearly empty house. Footsteps where no one was supposed to be. A tracking device on the stairs. A palace aide appearing that morning. The letter upstairs revealing hidden communication. Suddenly, everything feels interconnected, like a web tightening around Royal Lodge. And then Andrew says something that makes the hairs on her arms stand up. "When I opened my door, the footsteps stopped. Stopped. Right outside his room. As if whoever it was knew he had risen." Sarah feels a cold chill slide down her spine. This is no longer a domestic argument. This is no longer tension between two people. This is intrusion, pressure, surveillance, and possibly sabotage. She thinks about the device in her hand. And now she knows. She has to tell him. "Andrew," she begins, voice cautious. "I found something downstairs." But before she can show him, he cuts her off sharply. "No more surprises," he snaps. It isn't anger. It's fragility wearing the mask of anger. "I'm trying to help you," Sarah insists. "You were trying to help me upstairs too." Andrew fires back, the tension rising between them again. "Look where that led." Her patience thins. "This is different." "Is it?" "Yes," she says firmly. "Andrew, someone has been inside this house." "I'm not imagining that. And neither are you." He hesitates, thrown by the certainty in her voice. "What did you find?" Sarah opens her palm and reveals the device. Andrew stares at it with a mix of shock, confusion, and something else, recognition. He doesn't say anything for a full 5 seconds, just stares at the object as though it's a ghost, as though its presence is impossible. "Where did you get that?" he finally asks, voice low. "At the bottom of the staircase," she replies. "Right after I left the room." Andrew's eyes widen. "Someone dropped it." Her voice sharpens. "Yes, someone who wasn't supposed to be in this house." He reaches out slowly, as though approaching a venomous snake. Sarah hesitates, wanting to keep it, but then she hands it to him. His reaction is immediate. He curses under his breath. Not loudly, not angrily, but with the tone of someone who instantly recognizes the danger. "Tell me what this is," Sarah demands. Andrew doesn't answer. He turns it over in his palm, studying it with the horror of a man who has spent too much time being watched, judged, analyzed. Sarah steps forward. "Andrew." Still no answer. Talk to me. Finally, Andrew looks up, his eyes dark with a truth he didn't want to face. This isn't just a tracker, he says. It's a proximity monitor. Sarah's eyebrows knit. What does that mean? Andrew swallows hard. It detects movement in specific areas, tracks patterns, logs how long someone stays in a room, how often they return. A cold silence stretches between them, and it can send data, he adds, to whoever planted it. Sarah feels sick. Who would do that? Andrew looks at her long and hard. You know who. The answer hangs in the air like smoke. The palace. A private security contractor. A member of the king's team. A person trying to monitor Andrew's behavior during the most volatile stage of his downfall. Or worse, someone trying to gather evidence. Why would someone plant this in your home? Sarah asks, voice shaking. Andrew rubs his temples. Because I'm no longer trusted. By whom? Everyone, he says bitterly. The king. The advisors. The people trying to manage the monarchy's reputation. Sarah's heart twists, not out of sympathy, but out of dread. Because she now realizes something Andrew hasn't fully admitted even to himself. He is being watched. He is being monitored. He is being evaluated. Like a liability. Like a risk. Like a man who has lost too much to be left unsupervised. And the footsteps last night. Sarah asks. Someone checking the rooms, Andrew replies. Someone verifying where I was. Or what I was doing. Sarah's jaw clenches. Are you telling me someone walked outside your bedroom to keep tabs on you? Yes. And this device? It was to track our movements. Yes. And the palisade showing up this morning? That wasn't coincidence, Andrew says. They wanted to know whether anything had been discovered, whether someone slipped up. Everything clicks into place for Sarah. All the secrecy, all the stress, all the panic, all the strange behavior. He wasn't shutting her out because he wanted to. He was shutting her out because he panicked, because he felt cornered, because he didn't know who to trust. And the letter upstairs? The one Sarah found in the private room? Now she realizes what it was. A warning. A plea. A desperate attempt to navigate a situation spiraling out of control. Andrew, she says softly, why didn't you tell me? His voice cracks, not loudly, but enough to reveal everything. Because I didn't want you dragged into this. She closes her eyes briefly. The argument upstairs. The pain. The heartbreak. The moment she thought their bond was shattering. Now she sees the truth. Andrew wasn't pushing her away to hurt her. He was pushing her away to protect her. But that's when the most terrifying question hits her. Andrew, she whispers, what do they want? Why monitor you? Why invade the house? He looks at her, long, exhausted, and defeated. They want proof, he says. Proof of whether I'm stable. Proof of whether I can be managed. Proof of whether I should be allowed to stay here at all. Silence. Then he adds, and they want to know who's been helping me. Sarah steps back. Helping him. Living with him. Protecting him. Meaning. They were tracking her too. Her pulse spikes. Andrew, she says, you need to tell me everything. Right now. Andrew hesitates. And then, slowly, he walks to the drawer under the window. He unlocks it. He pulls out something wrapped in a folder. Something she's never seen before. Something that explains the panic. The secrecy. The fear. The palace's surveillance. The footsteps. The device. The letter. And when he hands it to her, Sarah feels her knees weaken. Because the document inside reveals exactly why someone was in the house last night. And what the monarchy is planning next. But the last page? The final detail? That's the part Sarah can barely process. And what she reads, what Andrew has been hiding, sets the stage for the biggest betrayal yet. Because the document contains a name. Her name. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Her name. Sarah Ferguson. Printed clearly in the same stark, unforgiving font that the monarchy uses for its most official documents. Seeing her name in that file feels like a punch straight to the gut. It steals her breath. It freezes her in place. It strips away every layer of denial she has been clinging to during this chaotic morning. Because this isn't a rumor. This isn't speculation. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is targeted, deliberate, calculated. And Sarah instantly understands one thing. This file wasn't meant for Andrew's eyes. It wasn't meant for her. It was meant for people above them, far above them. People who operate in shadows, behind polished doors, with agendas that don't need public approval. Her name has been categorized. She forces her eyes back to the page. even though every instinct tells her to put the folder down and walk away. But she needs to know. She needs to understand. She needs to see the full truth before she can decide the next step. Because whatever this is, it's bigger than the argument, bigger than the tracker, bigger than the footsteps, bigger than Andrew's secrecy. This is royal machinery in motion. And when royal machinery moves, lives get crushed. Sarah flips to the first page of the section marked with her name. Her heart hammers as her eyes sweep across lines written in the cold, emotionless language of bureaucracy. Household presence: Ferguson, Sarah. Duration of residence: ongoing. Influence level: high. Impact on stability of subject: A. Critical. Recommended action: review and removal, pending. She reads it twice, just to confirm she's not misinterpreting. Review and removal. Her removal. The palace isn't just monitoring Andrew. They're monitoring her, tracking their movements, assessing her influence, evaluating her role in his daily life. And they've reached a conclusion. She must go. Sarah's fingers tremble slightly, but she steadies them. She won't let Andrew see the crack forming in her composure. Not now. Not with stakes this high. She forces herself to read the next segment. Risk assessment summary. Ferguson's continued presence at Royal Lodge presents the following risk vectors. Emotional stabilization leading to unpredictable decision-making by subject. A. Potential codependency dynamics. Obstruction of institutional oversight. Interference with recommended removal protocols. Damage to public relations strategy post-title revocation 2025-inch. Sarah lifts her gaze to Andrew slowly. He is pale, not shocked, not surprised, just resigned, like he has been holding this inside for far too long. Andrew, she breathes, what is this? He closes his eyes, shoulders slumping under the weight of everything he hasn't said. It's what they've been discussing. For months. Her voice sharpens, a protective edge rising. Discussing what? Getting rid of me. Andrew opens his eyes, but doesn't speak immediately. And in that silence, Sarah realizes something painful. He didn't want her to see this. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't want her hurt. Why? She asks, her voice cracking just slightly. Why would they want me gone? Andrew lets out a long, tired sigh. Because they think you make me unpredictable. Sarah almost laughs. It's a sharp, bitter laugh. Unpredictable? Me? After everything I've done to stabilize your life? Your emotions? Your home? Andrew looks agonized. I know. Do you? She fires back. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the palace wants to remove the only person keeping you from collapsing. Andrew's face twists, not in anger, but in guilt. They think you give me too much strength, he says quietly. Sarah goes still. Too much strength. Too much support. Too much influence. The monarchy, the same institution that once fully embraced the Duke and Duchess image, now views her presence as a liability. Not because she harms him, but because she stabilizes him. Because a stable Andrew is harder to control. Do you understand what that means? She asks, stepping closer. Andrew nods. It means they don't want you to help me, he says. They want me manageable. Manageable. As in weak enough to be directed. Broken enough to accept decisions. Desperate enough to stay compliant. The realization hits Sarah like a blow. You're telling me, she says slowly, carefully, that the monarchy believes keeping you unstable is safer for them? Andrew looks away. Which is answer enough. Her pulse spikes. So the palace wants me out because I'm the only thing standing between you and total collapse? Andrew's voice is small. Yes. The implications are enormous. This isn't about optics. This isn't about public backlash. This isn't about Andrew's scandal-filled past. This is about power. A stable Andrew might question decisions. A stable Andrew might fight for rights. A stable Andrew might refuse certain protocols. A stable Andrew might expose things he isn't meant to expose. But a fractured Andrew, a panicked Andrew, a lonely Andrew, he poses no threat to the institution. Sarah's rage simmers just below the surface. Not rage at Andrew, but at the cold, calculated cruelty of the palace's logic. How long have they been watching us? She asks. A while, Andrew mutters. How long? She presses. He hesitates. Since late 2023. Sarah's stomach drops. 2 years? They've been monitoring you for 2 years. Andrew nods. And monitoring me? She adds. His silence confirms it. Sarah steps back, running a hand through her hair. She feels suddenly claustrophobic inside the ornate walls of the room. These walls have held so many memories, warm ones, painful ones, familiar ones, but now they feel like surveillance equipment, like eyes. Is this why you've been so distant? She asks. Why you've been hiding things? Why you've been panicking every time I ask questions? Andrew doesn't try to defend himself. He nods again. I didn't want them targeting you, he says quietly. I didn't want them to think you were part of the problem. Sarah nearly chokes on the irony. Part of the problem? I've been the one cleaning up your problems. I know, Andrew whispers. And now they want to remove me, she says bitterly. Like I'm some kind of obstacle to their agenda. You're not an obstacle, Andrew says urgently. You're the only person who's kept me alive these past few years. Sarah freezes. Because that sentence, that raw, emotional admission, reveals everything. Andrew didn't hide things because he didn't trust her. He hid things because he was terrified of losing her. Terrified the palace would punish her. Terrified she'd become collateral damage. And ironically, that very fear is what drove him to push her away. He wasn't trying to betray her. He was trying to protect her. But palace surveillance doesn't protect people. It isolates them, controls them, manipulates them. Sarah looks at the file again. Her name, her presence, her influence, her removal. And then she notices something she missed before, another section tagged under her name. Projected outcome upon removal of subject, F. Increased compliance by subject, A. Reduced likelihood of resistance to housing changes. Removal of emotional buffer reducing subject, A. S. Stability to institutional baseline. Final transition stages to be initiated post-withdrawal of Ferguson. Sarah's voice is barely above a whisper. They want to break you. Andrew doesn't deny it. And they want to use me to do it, she adds. No, he says quickly. They want to remove you so they can finish doing it. It's horrifying, strategic, cold, and deeply, painfully clear. Sarah steps toward him. Why didn't you fight? Andrew laughs, a hollow, defeated sound. Fight? I have no titles. No public support. No position. No influence. No allies. You have me. He closes his eyes. And that's exactly why they want you gone. A heavy silence fills the room. Then Sarah asks the question she has been avoiding since the moment she saw the tracker. Andrew, who do you think was walking outside your room last night? Andrew looks at her and says nothing. Because the silence is the answer. Someone linked to the palace. Someone with access. Someone monitoring him. Someone gathering information. Someone ensuring that removing Sarah would go smoothly. And the moment she found the tracker, she unknowingly stepped into the center of their plan. Andrew, she says slowly, they're not just watching you. They're maneuvering around you. I know, he says. And they're using your fear to control you. I know. And they are planning something bigger than removing me. This time, he doesn't respond. Because he knows she's right. Sarah takes a breath. Then another. Her voice becomes calm, steady, resolute. Andrew, what is the king planning for Royal Lodge? Andrew opens his mouth, closes it, then finally whispers. It's in the last document. Sarah looks down. Carefully, slowly. She reaches the final page. Her eyes scan it. Her heart stops. The name. That name. The one printed in stark, official ink at the bottom of the king's directive. The name that makes Sarah's heart plummet, not because she expected it, but because she never expected it. Not in 1,000 different worst-case scenarios. Not even in her most cynical moments. She stares at the page, her pulse thudding in her ears. Everything around her blurs. The ornate wallpaper, the heavy drapes, the antique furniture. All of it fades as her brain tries to process what she's reading. Because the king's plan for Royal Lodge isn't to empty it, it's to replace them with someone so unlikely, so explosive, so politically calculated that Sarah has to blink twice to make sure she isn't imagining it. But the name remains on the page. Clear, cold, final. Andrew watches her reaction closely. He doesn't speak. He doesn't move. He just lets her absorb the shock, because he knows, deeply, that there is no soft way to reveal this. Sarah's lips part, but no sound comes out. For a moment she feels suspended, like the world has yanked her off her axis and is waiting to see how she lands. Finally, in a trembling whisper, she manages one word. Why? Andrew exhales, hollow and defeated. He runs a hand through his hair, moving restlessly across the room like a man trying to outrun the truth. Because, he says darkly, the palace wants someone here who benefits them. Someone who poses no threat. Someone compliant. But her? Sarah asks, almost laughing at the absurdity. They would replace you with her? She gestures toward the document again, as if the name might disappear.